We Americans have, as a culture, have not been much thinking about poverty. We have trouble with it. It's not one of our primary categories over time. And I think that in order to see that, we have to see some of our Calvinistic origins. We can't have come to this nation as Catholics over time and not be aware of the power of the Calvinists, the Huguenots, and the Presbyterians and the Congregationalists, etc. As we read in R.H. Tawney's Religion and the Rise of Culture, that there was a relationship between doing well, perhaps looking for a sign of being saved, and prosperity in this world. And so there was always then, in that sensibility, a kind of temptation to see poverty. Let's see if I can remember is it Matthew? I think it's both in Matthew and John. What man? How does this man sin that he's had this done to him? The blind person. So that tendency is there. It's not. It doesn't come out all the time, but it's there. For instance, Simon Schama talks in his work, "The Embarrassment of Riches," the magnificent. We can see it in the art of 17th century Holland and Calvinist Holland. Although there's a Catholic component to Holland as well. And Simon Schama brings out the fact that the diet per day was about 3,500 calories, as far as we can. So the Dutch were really very happy campers, if you will, both in Holland and in New Amsterdam. If you look at colonial France with a Catholic culture, there is a sensitivity to poverty, and there is a sense, especially among the Native Americans, the missionaries, the boom or bust kind of life that the Native Americans lived. Either they would be guilty of excessive consumption, or they would be starving to death. In the effort to sort of moderate those areas. On the other hand, there's also a joyous sense in Huguenot Catholic interchange in early New France about prosperity as well. Say in Port Royal, there's a marvelous sense of the goodness of the North American continent and what it can bring forth for us, and a thankfulness to God for that. And that's a beautiful moment, because the earlier aspects of New France, the Huguenot Catholic dialogue, which had just been inaugurated with the Edict of Nantes, etc., was beginning to gain some momentum. So there was a sense that on the part of the Catholics as well that this would be a good place, North America, to live. And if you look at the lifestyle of the habitants in New France, their homes, their farms, the size of their families, etc., you can also see a reflection of this sense of well-being in colonial New England and Middle Atlantic. The prosperity of the New World is evident if you look at census figures, say from the 1740s or so in Philadelphia, or look at comparative wages, or if you look at the height of the colonists, their weight, their length of life, their earning power, all that is just way above the 18th century Hogarthian poverty that you can see in London at the same time. It just doesn't. I can't say it doesn't exist, but it doesn't get documented. It's not part of the sensibility of New England or Middle Atlantic colonists at that time. It's not part of the Quaker sensibility. It's to take care of the poor, yes, but not to concentrate much on it. I think it's very interesting for us of Catholic background to see to acknowledge the fact that the Catholics, three of the wealthiest 10 people at the time of the American Revolution were Catholics, the Brents and the Carroll, and two of the Carrolls. They were very wealthy people, and in Maryland, and their retainers were very wealthy. The people that were in their households, the people that rented from them, etc. And from that perspective, Archbishop Carroll, our first bishop, and this is not to trivialize him in any way, shape, or form, was from a very good family and had gone to a very good prep school, St. Omar's in Flanders, and came from a very leading family, and was unanimously elected a bishop, recommended to Rome, elected bishop by the 25 priests in the new nation at the time, because they knew who he was from, where his family was from, what kind of education he's from. And if you take a look, for instance, at the at Gilbert Stuart's portrait of Carroll, you can see the sort of, not a harsh, haughty aristocratic, but you can see the sort of kind of late 18th century sense of well-being in him. When the Irish came for the Erie Canal in the 1820s, the Irish experienced, this is before the famine, the Irish workers experienced this prosperity as well, working on the Erie Canal. They did not tend to come home with bring their children over the first time. It was mostly males came over to work on the canal. But of course, they also experienced something very different in those that fell off the, if you will, the wagon and became poor, the American workhouse culture. That you were taken good care of if you were truly deserving poor, you were taken very good care of in your local constituency, but you had to work, and you had to have that Calvinist connection there between sort of re-earning redemption. But poverty was in some way something to escape from. There's a very beautiful moment when the Great Famine comes. By contrast, the Bishop of Boston at the time, who was a Spalding of Maryland and Kentucky, very leading family, goes down to the wharf. The boat's coming in from Ireland. A mother gets off with her son, and the son is practically starving to death. He's never seen wretched people like this before. After all, he's an American. He has not seen this, and the bishop he records this in his notes, his memoir. He sends his associate, I guess his secretary or whatever, to the local store, and they buy gingerbread, and he hand feeds the little boy there to try to bring his strength back. I always think of that as a sort of telling situation that real big-time poverty is going to be coming into North America with the great the famine. And in the 1850s, of course, the poverty that is in the Irish immigrants, mostly Irish at this time, staying on the eastern coast, is basically one of the reasons that it's equated to the Irish as being contributing, rather, their interpretation of them by the know-nothings, that these were not welcome people here. They just could not measure up to this country, and that sensibility on the extreme East Coast lasts really for the rest of the century. On the other hand, and there's always another hand in history, isn't there? The German Catholics in the Midwest, under the guidance, we have a Benedictine father here, under the guidance of the Benedictines, Boniface Wimmer, the first Benedictine from Germany over here. They teach the people, the Germans have farms and cooperatives, etc. And it's really kind of a German economic miracle in terms of Catholic culture by the 1860s, 70s, 80s. And if you visit the great abbeys of the Midwest, Benedictine abbeys, you can see that kind of residual prosperity in those places. In other words, the solidity of the churches, the abbeys, the farm life, not ostentatious, but certainly escaping chronic poverty. The further west you go, and I know I'm not being a booster here, but the further west you go, you find this factor as well. Reverend Hugh Quigley writes a book in the 1870s about the Irish in California, and he says, as a promised land, the people are living better lives here. You can contrast that just a few years later with Jacob Riis's How the Other Half Lives, those photographs of urban poverty in New York in the 1890s. Now, something else comes into American sensibility in the 1890s. It's analogous to a theological conception, but it's a different point of view, and that poverty has systematic causes. Now, there's not a Marxist temptation at this point very strong in the country, but there is a great revolution against banking, especially after the banking failures of 1893. You can see this, you can read this sensibility in Jack London, you can read it in Hamlin Garland, etc., saying that poverty is a creation of an unjust system or those who are manipulating that system. I think one of my heroes in terms of getting out of this point of view and moving towards a more reconciling ability is Father John Ryan, professor of sociology and economics at Catholic University of America. Later, Monsignor Ryan, an assistant secretary was in Franklin Roosevelt's cabinet. His book, The Living Wage, comes out in 1909. and is republished 4 or 5, 6 times after that, where he really goes right into Thomas Aquinas in terms of just law theory about the personhood, and as persons, the economic aspects of what a good worker is entitled. But he also says on the other side what the worker owes the employer who gives him the just wage. I love the Catholic figures like Mother Jones. We should open her cause at some point. A woman who lost 4 of her children in a smallpox epidemic and devoted the rest of her life as a radical agitator against child labor in the industrial culture. Or Eamon Hennessy and Dorothy Day, and of course Dorothy Day's cause is open now, isn't it, proceeding through, for whom poverty is very much analogous to Father's talk about the sacredness of poverty, the idea that one discovers Christ in the poor. It's very interesting, too, that the relationship between poverty and racial prejudice. And I can obviously say the same, easy to say about say, prejudice against people of color. But during the 1930s, we saw white people, the Oklahomans, I won't even use the word OKIE because I'm a native Californian, and that's still a very bad word to use. The Oklahomans are given racial prejudice. They're being treated as they're with the Tobacco Road syndrome, that they're kind of subhuman and slack-jawed and incestuous and all sorts of terrible things, et cetera, because they're poor, because they're very poor. Their poverty becomes an affront to the rest of California as people are trying to struggle out of the Great Depression. I'll pass over very briefly the great arc of prosperity, 1948 into the 1980s. I don't think there's any doubt about that, except right in the middle of that, President Johnson launches his Great Society and his campaign to end poverty. I think that the current situation is that we're struggling, we Americans are struggling to overcome our reluctance to deal with poverty. We tend to see it as either systemic rather, in the sense of anti-Wall Street, the 1%, the wage, the political discourse that's going on today. I have no opinions on those things. I'm not an economist. Or we're very aware of declining middle class. We're very aware of the fact that poverty seems to be creeping upwards rather than being pushed downward. We're talking now about not necessarily poverty of spirit or poverty of religiosity, but just strictly income, wages, et cetera. We're very much aware of the working poor. I know as I say, I teach at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. I take the Dash bus to USC every morning when I'm teaching, and I very much see the people get on the bus who are the working poor, and I have a tremendous sense of my life is so privileged and easy and comfortable compared to the work that they have, and I have a great sense of being inspired by them, the working poor, the deserving poor. We're also struggling with the question of the poor who are dysfunctional. Alcohol, substance abuse, et cetera, because that doubles back to the Calvinist thing that you're getting it because you deserve it. What can we do about that? The debates about the homeless come into that, the whole question of not that one earns the poverty morally by being dysfunctional, but poverty is a direct result of that. Poverty is a result of divorce, for instance, plunging so many women, especially if they're left with primary responsibility for the children, into below the poverty line almost instantaneously. And then something new we're aware of now, I think, is the permanent poor by culture. There's the fact that poverty involves a culture now. And it seems, as all cultures, it has paradigms, it has DNA formulas that it can produce itself. And I think we're struggling with that too as well. And I think how touching it was to hear the theological view of St. Francis from Father, and to hear from, to have that, His Eminence read that quote about, and thinking, well, that was Pope Francis, but no, that turned out to be Pope Benedict. In other words, there's a long arc of thinking about world poverty now. And we're looking, is it corrupt governments? Is it disease? Is it water shortage? How do we deal? How do we Americans deal with our residual Calvinism, or shall we say our residual Augustinianism, excessive Augustinianism? How do we deal with global poverty in Africa and Asia, Latin America, especially when we're faced with structures like corrupt governments that we Americans want to cure, want to do something about? Or we're faced with disease and we feel that we can do something about that. Or we're faced about water shortage and we can do something about that. But I'm not a scripture scholar by any means, but I remember when Jesus said, the poor you have all with you always, and now I realize, having heard Father's talk, the poor are with us always because Christ is with us always, and somehow that linkage between Christ and the poor is one of the mysteries of our Christian Catholic faith. Thank you very much.